Today, we are going to conduct an experiment about spinal reflexes and human reaction. So, do you know what spinal reflexes mean? So let me explain about it. Reflexes are triggered by stimulus and result in predictable response. Reflexes are fast, which means we are not able to control it and we are not aware to it. So without wasting any time, let's move to experiment 5.1.
For this experiment, the material and apparatus we use is small tendon hammer. Firstly, the subject sat on a chair with the leg crossed. The upper leg was relaxed. The small tendon hammer was used to gently strike the large tendon below the kneecap. A sharp extension of the leg was observed. The experiment was repeated again, but this time, the subject was asked to read a book aloud while their tendon was struck. The experiment was repeated once more, but the subject deliberately tried not to give the response. For this experiment, we also use small tendon hammer. The subject knelt on a chair so that their feet hung over the edge of the chair. The foot was relaxed and the small tendon hammer was used to lightly tap the Achilles tendon. The stimulation was repeated at approximately 2 taps per second.
For experiment 5.3, we test how the swallowing reflex responds under different conditions. For this experiment, we only needed one item, which is a glass of water. First, I swallowed the saliva in my mouth. Immediately after, I tried to swallow again. I found that it was difficult to swallow a second time in rapid succession. Next, I drank a glass of water and repeated the first procedure. This time, I was able to swallow without difficulty.
For experiment 5.4, we studied human reaction time to sight stimuli. The materials we used were simple, just 2 stopwatches. One stopwatch was held by the experimenter, which is Ukasha, and the other by the subject, which is Irfan. We started the experiment by making sure that both the experimenter and the subject held a stopwatch each. Both of us started the stopwatch simultaneously. The experimenter stopped their stopwatch first, while the subject closely observed the action. As soon as the subject saw the experimenter stop, they stopped their stopwatch as quickly as possible.
For experiment 5.5, the material needed were 2 stopwatches, measuring tape, and a rope. A thread was used to measure the nerve pathway between the foot and the finger. We assume that the signals travel from the foot to the top of the brain through the spinal cord and then down to the shoulder and finger. They use a ruler or measuring tape to measure the length of the thread used in procedure 5. Both experimenter and the subject had a stopwatch each and started both watches simultaneously. The subject closed his eyes. Then, the experimenter pressed his watch to stop and simultaneously threaded on the subject's foot. The subject then pressed his stopwatch to stop. Then, they repeated the experiment for 10 times, calculated and recorded the average reaction time.
In experiment 5.1, we studied the patellar reflex, or also known as the stretch reflex. This reflex's main purpose is to prevent excessive stretching of the quadriceps. The stretch reflex is triggered by a tap to the patellar tendon, which stretches the quadricep muscles. This results in the activation of the muscle spindles. Then, the efferent neuron of the muscle spindles detect the stretch and sends a signal to the spinal cord and synapses directly with the motor neuron. This causes the quadricep muscles to contract, which results in the knee-jerk reflex. As you can see in the experiment, even though the subject is preoccupied by reading and is deliberately trying to resist the reflex still happens. This is because the stretch reflex is an involuntary action and cannot be controlled. As a precaution, to ensure the experiment runs smoothly, the subject's legs should be hanging and relaxed so that the tendon is in a roughly 90 degrees position.
In this 5.2 experiment, the results show that when the Achilles tendon was tapped, the foot moved downward quickly and smoothly, which means it's a plantar flexion. This happened because the body detects the sudden stretch in the tendon and will send the signal to the spinal cord. In response, the spinal cord instructs the soft muscle to contract, that causing the movement to happen. Since this process happened automatically without the person controlling it, the reflex was fast and involuntary. As a precaution step, the person being tested needed to stay relaxed, and the hammer had to be used with the correct force and angle to ensure the accurate result.
The results show that swallowing saliva repeatedly without liquid was difficult, which means swallowing water was much easier. This happened because swallowing is controlled by brainstem, which requires a stimulus like liquid to continue the reflex efficiently. In summary, this experiment demonstrated how the swallowing reflex works and why it is harder to swallow multiple times in a row without liquid. This reflex helps regulate the process of moving food and liquids safely down the throat.
For experiment 5.4, we measured the subject's reaction time to visual stimuli by recording the time difference between the experimenter stopping the stopwatch and the subject reacting to it. The results recorded in table 5.1 show the reaction time of the subject to visual stimuli across 10 trials. The reaction times vary, with the shortest recorded at 0.07 second and the longest at 0.80 second, with an average reaction time of 0.367 second, which is within the expected human range. The effectiveness of the experiment was limited by manual timing errors, as the use of stopwatch introduced slight inconsistencies. The results align with neurological processes where the optic nerve transmits visual signals to the brain, which then processes the information and sends motor commands to stop the stopwatch. Several precautions were taken, including ensuring synchronized stopwatch starts, conducting the experiment in a quiet environment, and performing multiple trials for accuracy.
The experiment aimed to determine the speed of nerve impulse transmission and reaction time in response to a stimulus. When the body receives a stimulus, sensory neuron transmit signal to the brain, which then processes the information and sends motor signal to the muscle to generate a response. This process involves complex neuron pathways that affect reaction time and impulse speed. In this experiment, the nerve pathway between the foot and finger was measured at 2.63 meter, and the impulse transmission speed was found to be 15.20 meter per second, with an average reaction time of 0.173 seconds. To ensure accuracy, precautions such as synchronizing stopwatch usage, minimizing external distraction, and maintaining consistent posture were taken.
In conclusion, all the 5 experiments that we had done in the lab 5 will successfully achieve their objective. The result had showed that the spinal reflex can be functioned without the conscious control, and the reaction time can be different under various conditions. Overall, all the experiments helped us to understand better about how the nervous system can quick respond to the stimuli.